Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So this is part one of my 1,000 subscriber Q&A. Back on January 7th of this year, 2020, this channel surpassed 1,000 subscribers. I posted a video where I thanked all my longtime viewers and subscribers, and also, of course, my new subscribers, and I solicited questions for an upcoming Q&A. This is going to be part one of that Q&A segment. Now, for those of you that were around when I did the 500 subscriber Q&A, you know that I get asked very in-depth questions, and I like to answer them in full. That particular series, I think, took 3 parts to get through all the questions. So if you did ask me a question, and I don't answer it in this video, rest assured it's going to be answered in segment 2, 3, possibly segment 4, if we have to go that far. I also want to assure all my loyal viewers that I will also continue to release original content in between these Q&A videos so that the average person that watches this channel isn't just inundated with question and answer videos over the next week or week and a half. So we got a lot of content to get to. We're going to go right in order. Some of these questions are very detailed. Others are just a quick, brief sentence or two. So the first question, why are first edition books valuable, yet you say reprints and remakes of other media will possibly devalue the value of that media? Well, it goes back to antiques versus collectibles. A lot of book collectors specifically want first edition books because it's actually how the author intended that book to be perceived when it first premiered. For instance, I'm a huge Great Gatsby fan. You guys probably know that if you watch any of my other videos. I do own a first edition copy of The Great Gatsby. It's probably one of my holy grails in book collecting. Well, that particular item, when I hold it, I recognize that that particular item or that particular book was exactly how F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author, wanted that material to be presented to his original audience. Subsequent printings of that book, where they change even something subtle, changes what the author originally intended. Even if it was edited better in a subsequent version, a lot of people are going to be drawn to having that first edition copy because it's the closest connection that we're going to ever get to what was going on in that author's head when he wrote that particular piece. When it comes to other collectible medias, one of the things that you got to understand is the collectibles marketplace determines if a first print is valuable or not. In certain collecting categories, guys, and I'm not going to name them all, first prints are not always valuable. In certain collecting categories, a second or third print or a variant is more valuable on the market than a first print. Now, it is true with what's happening with video game collecting right now. There's a lot of people going after first print, first edition, vintage Nintendo games. I get that. But that's not always the case. Subsequent variants and or editions can be more valuable than first editions. So be careful with that thinking. That's very linear thinking when people think that, well, I have a first print. Like right now with Amiibo. A lot of people are claiming, I have a first print Amiibo, it's mint, it's complete, it's going to always hold value because it's a first print. That's flawed thinking. The secondary marketplace, when that item becomes collectible, and remember, it takes 30 years for a collecting category to stabilize. So 30 years from now, or literally 25, because Amiibos really came out towards the end of 2014, that's when that market, if there is a valid collecting marketplace for Amiibos in 25 years from now, the market will decide if first editions are valuable. It may be that subsequent printings that were produced in less quantities become more valuable than first editions and printings. Be very careful with that. Next question. Hey Sean, what's your thought on World War II memorabilia such as German medals and any other World War II German memorabilia? Now, to be fair, I am going to be doing videos on firearm collecting, World War II, World War I collecting, Civil War, Revolutionary War. The problem is, guys, I get so pulled into the pop culture side of this particular channel because there's a lot of people out there that watch my commentary just for video game collecting or comic book collecting or even coins or vintage toys, whatever it is. So it kind of pulls me away from putting a lot of effort into those videos that I want to go into detail with, like art or collectible first edition books. And I apologize to my hardcore enthusiasts out there that do want to see me do those videos. But almost every time I premiere a video and talk about video games, it leads to another topic on video games that I have to comment on. So it's a state of balance, but I will get to those videos, rest assured. But to answer your question, if you're going to go after World War II memorabilia, the friend in that particular marketplace is rarity and demand. That's really what you have to look for. A lot of people come into collecting World War II firearms, World War I firearms, even firearms of the more modern era. You have to be very careful, because if it was used in a war or it is government surplus, a lot of governments made a lot of firearms to fight these wars. So rarity is your friend in these markets. Embrace it. It's just like coin collecting. If you want to collect coins, you have to go after scarce coins and or quote-unquote rare coins to make it work for you. Getting a collection of common date coins is not an investment strategy in the year 2020, unless if you're investing in just the precious metal content. And there's other ways to do that where you don't have to invest in coins, if that's the route you want to go. Well, in regards to any type of World War II memorabilia, German metals, which I actually do have some knowledge on, you want to go after rarity. You want to go after not so much the esoteric stuff, but you want to go after the stuff that's sought after that also has rarity. So you want to follow auctions. You want to really do your research on that particular market. Next question. Could you list the books again that you recommend everyone in the antiques and collectibles trade should have read? There are several books that I routinely recommend. I did do a video on other books that I also recommend about speculative bubbles, about understanding market dynamics. Like if we go back and we look at the 1990s comic book market bubble, or if we look at Beanie Babies, or even the 1980s baseball card bubble, the main book that you want to read, if you seriously are thinking about getting into the antiques and collectibles trade, there's several books you got to read. The first one is Killer Stuff and Tons of Money. This was written by Maureen Stanton, and it came out right around 2010, 2011. This book is spectacular, but there is one word of warning that I give to the people that read this. This book was written right at the aftermath of the Great Recession. This book can be seen as very negative to some, including me, who are active in the trade. So I just want to put that warning out there. The antiques trade is not dying. The collectibles trade is not dying. The art market is not dying. The antiquities trade is not dying. So just know that going in before you read this book, because it was written by an outsider from the trade, and that's what makes it even more prominent, how much good information is in this book. So this is one of the books that I recommend. Again, it's called Killer Stuff and Tons of Money. It's by Maureen Stanton, and it is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Second book I recommend people read. This was written in the 1980s. This is by Harry Rinker, who is probably one of my favorite people in the antiques and collectibles trade. If you follow his work, if you follow his columns, he writes for publications just like I do in the trade. The only difference is he's syndicate. He's more popular, and a lot of more publications publish his work because he's well known. He's also an older gentleman. I think he's in his late 70s as we speak. He wrote a book back in the 1980s called How to Make the Most of Your Investments in Antiques and Collectibles. And this is called The First Insider's Guide to Manipulating the Antiques and Collectibles Markets to Maximize Your Investment. This book is long out of print. It was written long before the internet was a thing. So a lot of the concepts in here, for most people, are going to come across as very dated. I understand that. You still need to understand the basics before you apply it to the internet age. At present time, we have auction houses, we have grading companies all getting involved in the secondary market. That's a big no-no in my opinion. If you seriously don't think Wada Games or a lot of these companies are doing anything wrong, you really need to read this book, apply it to modern day, what's happening right now in some of these markets, and I guarantee you're going to walk away with a new perspective if you don't need to take my word for it. So if you watch my videos that I do on Wada Games, Pawn Stars, market manipulation, and you shake your head and you say that Sean guy's wrong, well, after you read this book, I think it'll become more clear. Now, the truth is, anybody with the means, I did a video on it, can manipulate the antiques and collectibles trade. That's just the way it is, guys. Especially in today's day and age with YouTube, social media, public auction records, and the like. It's not that hard. This book will at least expose a lot of those secrets and at least get you thinking in that realm. So there's the 2 books that I recommend. If you're going to read a book on speculative bubbles, the best one is called Comic Wars. I think it's by Dan Raviv. I think I'm saying that right. He wrote a book back in the 1990s about all these companies that were pretty much using mass-produced scarcity as opposed to organic collectability to get all the Timmies and the Poindexters out there to part with their lunch money, their allowances, to buy all these flashy hollow foil comic books that pretty much sold for a premium on the primary market, and companies like Marvel, DC, Image, all these fly-by-night companies that are no longer in business made a ton of money off this, and all these items that had perceived collectible value, it never materialized, and the market eventually crashed because of that. That's a great book to read too. So there, I just gave you 3 books that should provide a lot of reading material for the next coming weeks or months. I will be doing, guys, more videos on that topic. There's a ton of books I can recommend in the trade. It's just I use this channel to recommend books that you should be reading now because it kind of goes along with the videos that I'm producing. If I start doing more videos on coins, for instance, I'm going to recommend this book, The Coin Collector's Survival Manual, the revised 7th edition by Scott A. Travers. This is probably one of the best books you can read on investing and getting into the hobby of collectible coins from an investment angle. This, and there's another book also that I would recommend. I'm going to save that book for another video that I'm going to be doing on coins. That should answer your question. If you have any follow-up comments for me, just leave them in this video and I will see them. Thank you. Next question. I mentioned before I would love to know your thoughts on the NeoGeo marketplace. Will the sharp increase in prices for AES games over the last few years continue? Here's the problem with a lot of these esoteric video game systems, and I don't care if we're talking about NeoGeo. You could put TurboGrafx-16 in this list. You can put Atari Lynx, Atari Jaguar, 3DO, Philips CDI, Nintendo Virtual Boy. The problem with a lot of these esoteric items is that in 10, 20, 30 years, there's going to be nobody that pretty much remembers them when they were first on the marketplace and is going to want to go after them and pay a premium for them on the secondary market. NeoGeo is overvalued and overheated right now, in my opinion. There's a lot of people that made significant amounts of money in NeoGeo because back in the mid-1990s to the late 1990s, they were buying this stuff up and buying it not as an investment because they wanted to own it. Well, today, those collectors got very lucky. They can cash out. You know, I mentioned this in another video. Growing up, I was a privileged kid. I don't think there's an issue with me saying that. I had a NeoGeo growing up. I had a NeoGeo Gold AES system that was bought at Electronics Boutique. It came with the system, 2 oversized joystick controllers, the memory card, and I was lucky enough to get a copy of Fatal Fury with it. That system I played till my fingers bled. I loved it. Now, to be fair, I only had 4 other games for that particular system back in the day because games were $150 to $200. It was insane. But I love that system, so I get the passion that NeoGeo collectors have. The problem is, most people who are going to want to play that in the future are going to download those games, or they're going to seek out a lot of the SNK compilation discs and games released for other systems, and they're going to play those games that way. Nobody born after the year 2000, I shouldn't say nobody because there's exceptions to every rule, is going to pay $10,000 for a NeoGeo game. They were not alive when that system premiered. They don't understand the historic significance of that particular video game system unless they were alive in the late 1980s and the late 1990s, seeing the issue of GamePro or Electronic Gaming Monthly where it premiered that console, and then seeing the price, how much it was, and watching some of the interesting SNK advertisements that pretty much came out at that time. You really wanted to own that system, especially when you would visit the arcade and you would play a lot of these games in the arcade and you would realize, crap, I can get a home system of this if I had the money. Well, I was lucky enough where my parents had the means and I had savings and I did get the home system. So it is in my blood. So when I say that it's not going to hold value long term, I understand that there's a lot of passionate collectors out there. I'm trying to relate to you guys because I am one. But I sold off most of my NeoGeo holdings within the last 5 or 10 years for that very reason. Ironically, some of the games that I sold too early. I didn't maximize my gains. but it was okay because I paid like 1/10 of the price that I sold them for, so I still made a ton of money. I mean, I had Sengoku 3, I had Metal Slug 3, I had a lot of games that I acquired after the year 2000 for a small premium. I got very lucky. But growing up, I only had about 4 games with the system because it was just too expensive to collect for, let's be honest. Next question. Hi, Sean. I was curious on your thoughts on collecting original comic art. I participate in the hobby and pretty much only collect pieces that I personally enjoy and tend to keep. Similar to other hobbies, I seem to see people trying to flip and speculate on a lot of the modern art and just wondered what your thought of it. Be very careful with modern comic art. Guys, the reason why vintage comic art is valuable is because nobody saved it. You didn't have artists going out there doing a Action Comics cover from the 1950s or 60s going, I better keep this original piece of art. It's going to become valuable and sought after. Comic collecting was not a thing at that time. Comic collecting started heating up in the late 1960s. That's what led to the original Overstreet comic book price guide being first produced in 1970. This is why I caution a lot of people from thinking comic books like X-Men 94 and giant-sized X-Men 1 are good investments. Those books were released in 1975. That was in the first comic book speculative bubble, where a lot of people were buying this stuff off of stands, keeping it near mint condition, and they were selling it into the market just 10, 20, 30 years later. That's why comic book collecting is a thing. So many Bronze Age issues exist compared to Silver Age, compared to Golden Age. You have to be very careful what you put your money into if you are buying for quote-unquote investment. In this particular case, you are wise to go after comic art, but I would never ever tell you to invest in modern era comic art. The market for modern era comic art has changed drastically over the years, where artists are commercializing it to the point where they're producing a lot of it and at an alarming rate. There is a speculative market for a lot of that stuff that is going to eventually dissolve. It's not like going after the stuff that was produced in the 50s, 60s, and even, to be fair, the 70s. Because back in the 70s, even when the Overstreet price guide was produced in 1970, people were going after comic books. They weren't going after the comic art. So if you're buying art from the 70s, even the 80s, you're pretty much safe. But if you start going after comic art that's produced today, be very careful. That is a speculative fool's game. Eventually, that bubble is going to shrink a bit. It won't pop, but it will shrink a bit because there's so many pieces out there. So your best bet is to stick to comic art from the 1970s, 1980s, but even if you can afford it, because you're going to pay a fortune if you go back to the 1960s and 50s. But that's where the best bang for your investment dollar is, quite literally, to be honest, in that market. So it's a great market. It's just, I think that a lot of it is speculative at present day because of how the art is valued and how it's treasured by a lot of people. And that's the problem for modern era comic art, in my opinion. Next question. Hi, I have a question regarding how to find out definitively how many Nintendo Amiibos were made of each type, and if we can find out if some are discontinued or will be reproduced. Please be very careful in the Nintendo Amiibo marketplace. I made money with Nintendo Amiibos by selling into the speculative bubble. I've made a little bit more money recently because I was wise enough to go after a lot of the 2-packs, meaning the Splatoon 2-pack, the Fire Emblem 2-pack, the Zelda Wind Waker 2-pack. A lot of those pieces I was able to get in bulk, meaning 4 to 8 quantities. Well, now some of them are going for $100 on eBay, so I sold into that market. Ironically, though, there's a lot of people that love to defend Amiibo and they claim, my collection's worth X. No, you have some pieces that went up in value if you're actively collecting them. But what you're not taking into account is the fact that you also have some pieces that fell in value. If you don't believe me, search eBay completed auctions. Don't forget to factor in shipping, eBay fees, PayPal fees, managed payment fees, whatever expenses you have, even if you have to go out and buy a box to ship the Amiibo in to make sure it gets to your consumer in near mint condition. All those costs add up. There's very few people making a fortune in Amiibos anymore. Be very careful. That's a very big speculative market full of mass-produced scarcity as opposed to organic collectability. Most people that bought Amiibos, I hate to say this, guys, kept them factory sealed. And there's a lot of people out there that love to argue with me. Sean, you don't understand. It's DLC. It's not just a toy figurine. You can use it to play the game. Well, ironically, you don't need the Amiibo to do that. You can log on to eBay and you can buy just the tag, the actual Amiibo itself without the figure, and you can buy that if all you want is the DLC. So be very careful in that market, guys. It's speculative. I don't think 30 years from now, too many people are going to care about Amiibos. Amiibo has been known, Nintendo has been known in regards to Amiibos, to create them over and over again in different packaging. This sets up all kind of debates like, Sean, I have a first edition Amiibo. And I say to these people, congratulations. In another 30 years, when the secondary market is strong for Amiibos, if it ever is, that market will decide if that first edition Amiibo has more value than a second printing or a third printing. So be very careful in that market. As to figuring out how many different Amiibo were produced or what the production runs were, that's very hard to do because Nintendo keeps that information highly secretive. I don't even think people at Nintendo know just how fragmented the market is because they sell to different regions, Japan, the European region, and then the US. So it would be very hard to get a total count. I can tell you a lot of the Amiibos that are perceived to be quote-unquote rare in the US were readily available in Japan and other areas. That's a known fact, guys. So be very careful in this market. It's highly speculative. If Nintendo produces an Amiibo that you want to have, you like it, you have a nostalgic attachment to it, by all means buy it. But just don't look at it as a valid investment. There's too many people on collecting forums that are made up of Timmies and Poindexters who claim their Amiibo collection is a valid investment. And I no longer go on a lot of these forums anymore because for somebody like me, I just read that, chuckle, and move on. It's not even worth responding to. But if you love them, by all means, you have the money, buy them. Don't look at it as an investment, though. So next question. Great topics you have planned. I would like to hear your thoughts on wine collecting. Okay, let me start there. Wine can be a great investment, but it is not for the novice, and it is not for the beginning and or intermediate collector. Wine collecting is a sophisticated market. The people that get into wine collecting have a lot of money. They tend to have a wine cellar in their house. They know how to transport. They know how to store wine. They also understand the fundamentals of that market. That is very hard to learn. You are talking about a market on par with coins, artwork, antique furniture, antique glass. If you are going to speculate in wine, be very careful. I know a lot of people that entered that market and lost their proverbial asses because they bought wrong. They bought the incorrect type of wine for investment, and or they didn't know how to store it. They didn't understand the fundamentals of the market, which I'm going to be doing a video on coming up. I'm not going to get into it here, but they didn't understand taxes, how that plays into a role with wine collecting. There's a lot of different fundamentals that go into that marketplace and profiting from it. I do know people who make money in it. I've dated women who their parents have collected wine. They had wine cellars in their house. These people made a ton of money. They knew what they were doing. But on the same token, it is a very risky collecting category to get into at present time. So now I'm going to get to your other question. Here's my question. Has your passion for a specific collectible or antique category ever blindsided you into making a bad investment decision? Any buyer's remorse stories to share? The answer is yes. I am a huge fan of pretty much anything made out of glass. It's second to coins in my opinion. That's why you guys can see in some of my videos I have display cases up in my living room full of contemporary and or antique art glass. Well, one of the categories that I got into really heavily was antique, vintage, and or contemporary marbles, meaning those little wonderful pieces of glass that people used to play with as a kid. Well, there is a major collecting storm in that particular collecting category where over the last several years, people have started to pay ridiculous amounts for marbles, whether they're antique and or machine made. Well, I got into the market and I started spending heavily in that particular market. I have marbles in my glass display case upstairs that cost $2,000 or $3,000 for one marble. That's why I have to laugh when I do these videos. You'll hear some Timmies and Poindexters come into the comment section and go, "Where's all the valuable items, Sean?" And I'm sitting there laughing in my head because when I shoot a video from my living room upstairs, I'm surrounded by $30,000 worth of antiques just in that one scene where you see me sitting on a chair talking to you guys. Well, marbles was one collecting category that I got caught up in, and I spent a ton of money on marbles to the point where we're in the tens and thousands of dollars range. If I ever sold back most of those pieces to the marketplace, I would take a 20 to 40% loss. There was a speculative bubble in marbles over the last 10 years that I got involved in, and I will never be able to recover from that collecting category. Now, to be fair, antique marbles will always have value because they're more than 100 years of age. I bought most of those marbles in the utmost best condition I could afford and find. So a lot of those marbles are top tier for the market. So those items are more investment grade. But a lot of the machine-made marbles that came about in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, I would take a bath on if I sold them today, to be quite honest. So that is one collecting category that I kind of regret how much time and energy I put into it. I have a lot of knowledge in that market, but I put too much money into it for what I got out. Next question, and after this question, I'm probably going to cut this off because this is going to be part 1, and then next upload we'll go to part 2, part 3, part 4. Thoughts on VHS and DVD collecting. Okay, movies, in my opinion, are a horrible investment. I don't care if you're collecting them on VHS, Blu-ray, DVD, whatever. Movies overall are never, ever were and are a prominent collecting category in the antiques and collectibles trade. There are some movies like Blade Runner Final Cut, some of these other movies that do sell for a significant premium on the secondary market. But overall, if you collect movies, chances are your collection is going to drop in value. It will never rise exponentially. There will never ever be a speculative bubble in collectible movies. Even if you look at some of the clickbait articles out there that claim that your VHS Disney film or movie can be worth $5,000, most of them are complete lies. There's very few movies selling on VHS for a significant premium. The way to tell if you have a valuable movie in the VHS collecting realm is, was it available on DVD? Was it re-released on Blu-ray? That kills its value. It's no different with a lot of these other collecting categories that are affected by reprints, which ironically goes back to the first question that we covered in this particular video. Now, ironically, with VHS and DVD, there are people who are out there trying to build certain collections because they're kind of upset with the advent of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, that these items aren't available in physical form anyway. But you have to understand, collecting these particular items with an investment mindset in mind is a losing proposition overall. These type of items should not be looked at as an investment or something that can be speculated upon. So be very careful if you are getting into VHS, DVD, Blu-ray collecting for those reasons. Now, if you just like movies, you're a movie buff, and you like all the extended scenes and extras that they put in the Blu-ray version of these releases, you have the money to buy them, by all means buy them. But please don't think they're going to be a valid long-term investment. It's not going to happen, guys. I'm sorry. More on that because I got asked more questions on this in part 2. So I'm going to stop there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope it was enlightening. Part 2 will air within the next few days. I will also continue to upload original content. If you do like these particular videos, let me know in the comments section. Please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. Thanks, guys, and I love you all.